So hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Recently I was on Blue Sky, and I noticed they made a fun new video feed, and I thought it'd be a fun challenge for me just to make this in React Native myself. And after making it, I thought, hey, this would be a really awesome tutorial. And so you'll see off to the side that demo actually running, but that's what today's tutorial is actually going to be on. It's how to make a video feed in React Native. They seem to be kind of a cornerstone of social networks lately, like they're in Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Blue Sky now. Video feeds are just part of everything, and so I thought it'd be a really cool essential to bring to the channel. So, as always, in the link down below, you will have a link to all of the solutions for this, as well as the starter code. The main branch has the solution, and the starter branch has the starter code if you want to follow along. And just as a quick heads up, guys, there are a fair amount of Android related quirks in this video, but I'll make sure to guide you through them as we go. Other than that, please like and subscribe, and let's get started. So we're about to get started, and unfortunately, we've already run into our first Android-specific issue. So when I was going through building this, I tested it on a lot of different platforms. I tested it on iOS simulator and iOS devices, and everything worked fine on the iPhone and the simulator. No problems, everything's good as you would expect. On Android, I tested on two different physical devices. So a Pixel 7 phone on the high end, and on the lower end, I also tested on a Samsung A14. So on both of these devices, the app ran just fine. On the A14, it was a little slower, there were some frames dropped, but the app did run. So on the Android simulator specifically, you can't test this. And the reason is because for whatever reason, the video player, after you scroll down to a certain point, will cause the Android emulator to crash. So you cannot use the Android emulator here. You have to use a physical Android phone. So what I'm using here is a Pixel 7 that I own, and I'm just projecting it to the screen using SCRCPY. Again, this is not an Android simulator that I'm using. This is an actual real Android phone that I'm just projecting to the screen. As I said, I'll be going back and forth throughout this. We'll run into more Android issues, but let's start coding, and as we go along, I'll point those out as they come. Okay, so I know I just gave that introduction with Android, but really what I want to do is start with iOS, just because the code's a little bit easier to write, and then we'll go back to Android once that code's all set and ready to go. But before we get into that, I first want to talk a little bit about the boilerplate that we have here. Right now, we have a basic Expo router startup here. I gave you some data, which is just the URLs for all the videos, and right now, the different screens are really just views with nothing in them. So we're pretty much doing this from scratch. I just generated the project for us so that we wouldn't waste time doing that. And I pre-entered some data so that we wouldn't have to worry about that either. All right, so to get started, we're gonna go into the layout file, and under iOS, we're gonna do position absolute. So what position absolute does is it allows us to fill the whole screen so that you actually get a little bit of the color here showing under the tab bar. So like if I was to comment this out, you see this is pure white, but as soon as I put absolute back, you see that the bottom tab bar becomes transparent and everything shows under there just a little bit. And now what we can do is we can go into the index file and we can start actually creating our list. The first thing that we're gonna do is we're going to handle scrolling with that nice page scrolling where you get sort of one full screen of video at a time. We're not going to do video right away. We're going to do layout first, but there's a lot to layout that we need to focus on. That being said, I feel like it's fairly simple at the same time, and you'd be surprised how far you can get with just using basic stuff from flat list. So let's create a flat list now. And what we're going to do is we're going to give it some data. But what our data is going to be is the data from videos. So let's make a hook here and say all videos and set all videos. And that's going to be equal to use state. And in here, we're going to just import all the videos from the data file. And that just gives us the first 6 videos or whatever right here. Okay, so let's pass that in. We're gonna use set all videos later. We're not gonna worry about that too much right now. And then I'm going to create a render item function. Render item, of course, is what allows us to actually render components to the screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component above here, and I'm going to call this video wrapper. This is going to get more sophisticated as we go, but for now, I'm just going to pass the data into it as the first prop. This prop list is going to grow as we go along. But for now, I'm just going to have one prop, which is data. And that's going to have list render item info. And that's just going to be a string because the info that we're going to pass is just going to be a simple URL. So now in our component, what we're going to do is we're going to destructure out the index and the item from data. And I want to pause here just to talk about what we're doing because a lot just happened. So render item gives us this list render item info. Inside of list render item info, we get item and index. The index is the actual value starting at 0 of where you are in the list. So 0 being the first item, 1 being the second, and so on and so forth. And item is the data from the array that you passed in, which in this case is a URL of a video. So let's sort of finish off the component here. And it's going to be a view. And style is going to have some dynamic aspects to it, so I'm not going to create a style sheet. And right away, I'm going to set the background color just to be some test values. This is not going to be what we're going to finish it with. I'm just going to alternate colors for like every other cell. I'm going to go with red or blue. And so far, nothing is showing because, of course, I need to do a few things. But one of those things is, of course, putting my data in the video wrapper and putting it in the render item. So right now nothing is showing. And the reason is because I don't have a height or a width, right? So I'm going to get my height and width from dimensions from React Native. Because I want this to be the full screen, I'm going to say get window, and that will give me the height of the screen. And width will give me the width of the screen. And I can use that in order to sort of build my each individual cell. So the width is just the width. And the height is going to just be the height. And as you can see, I'm scrolling freely and I'm getting red and blue stuff. So I don't like this orange background. If we over scroll, I'm just gonna make that black because that was kind of weird. But we don't want it free scrolling, right? We want it to kind of like lock in. Whenever you scroll down, you want it to lock to red, lock to blue, and so on and so forth, right? And the way that we do that is actually pretty simple. We just set this paging enabled to true. And now, every time we scroll, we get just a single page, which is really nice. But as you can see, we have this bar on the right-hand side. It looks kind of weird in social networking apps. So I'm going to remove that. I'm going to say shows vertical scroll indicator is going to be equal to false. And there's another optimization that I want to do, and it's this initial num to render prop. What this does is when the app initially loads, it will render a certain amount of cells. I'm saying just render one off the bat because you're only going to be viewing one video at a time, realistically. Like when the app loads, you're only going to get one cell, one cell, one cell. I don't need to render 10 videos and slow down the app so that I can do all that. That just doesn't make any sense. So unfortunately, just when you thought this was easy, we've run into another Android quirk. And as you can see, I have my Pixel 7 over here, and we're going to use that to fix things. But if I scroll on the Pixel 7, you can see that like it slowly kind of loses the page, which is really odd, right? And the reason is because this tab bar, you can't really go under it. It doesn't behave the same way as it does in iOS. So the way that we fix this is by setting a snap to interval, but it only is going to apply to Android. So we're going to say if platform.os is Android, we're going to apply some special styles. And in iOS, we're going to leave this undefined. So for the moment, the number I'm going to just throw in here is just 100. It's not going to do anything. But what we have to do is we have to subtract the full height of this object here, this component, from the tab bar at the bottom, and that will give us our snap to interval. So the way we get the height of the bottom is that we say const bottom height is equal to use bottom tab bar height, like this. And in here, what we can do is we can subtract the height, which if you remember is the height of the screen, minus the bottom height. We should now be able to come pretty close to doing this. So let's refresh again. Oops, let's not start Android Studio. And if we go through this, we're snapping, but we're still losing a little bit of screen space here, as you can see. And the way that we fix that is we have to now make an adjustment to our view here. That's the list view cell. So for the height, we also have to do some platform specific stuff. So if you're on Android, the height, just like before, needs to be the height minus the bottom height. And again, we have to grab that through the hook. So const bottom height is equal to use bottom tab bar height. Whereas if you're in iOS, it's just going to be the height. So let's reload again. And now, as you can see, we can nicely just snap to the red and the blue, just like that, which is really cool. Okay, so the last thing I want to do before moving out of this section on setting up the scrolling is actually implementing lazy loading. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually not quite implementing lazy loading, but just kind of displaying the URLs. And this is just to make things easier. So you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 URLs. And what we want to do is we want to lazy load these in when we get close to the bottom of the screen. And we have to fake this a little bit because I don't have a web request that does this. Instead, what I do is I kind of pull it from a file, but we can do this pretty easily. And the code that we write here is actually going to be pretty close to what you'd write anyway. So what I'm going to do is start by creating a reference, which is kind of like a global variable. And I'm just going to set it equal to 0. So this is just going to simulate the number of times we've refreshed, and that's going to give us our data set. In production, obviously you would never have this value. I'm just using it because it's the only thing I have to kind of simulate the web request. So let's create a method for this, and we'll say fetch more data. And in here, what we're going to do is, to get our first batch, we're going to say if the number of refreshes is equal to 0. What we're going to do is we're going to get our set all videos. And in here, we're going to copy all of our videos. And we are going to put in the second array. So this is exactly what you would do if you had more URLs from a web request. You would just do your set state, and you would add the old videos to the new videos. I'm going to copy the same thing for 1, and this time I'm going to put 3 in for the value. Again, if you were doing this in production, you wouldn't have videos 1 and videos 2. You would just have one of these with all the videos. I'm just doing it this way because you sort of have to pretend we have a backend. However, the code's actually simpler because you just need one set state when you're in production. Okay, so for the number of refreshes, I'm just going to increment that every time we get near the bottom. So in order to have lazy loading, we first have to set a threshold, and we're going to set that to 0.3. So when we get to 0.3 distance from the end, we're going to load more values. And our onEndReached method is going to be fetch more data. And so let's reload, and let's see if we get more than 6 here. Because if I go into data, as you can see, I initially load 6 values. So in the end, we should be able to get 6, 9, 12 that we actually go through here, because when we're partway through the list, it's going to lazy load more values. Okay, so let's go through the list and see if there's 12 values here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's good. So it's proof that all of our values lazy loaded in as we were going. Alright guys, so now that we have the scrolling working, it's time to add the video stuff in. And in order to do this, we have to break out of Expo Go, and we have to use Expo Prebuild. The library that we're going to use is called React Native Video. You could use Expo Video as well, but I had trouble getting it to kind of pause and play at the right times, so I ended up using React Native Video instead. This is another advantage of Expo, right? You don't necessarily have to use all of their libraries. Because Expo gives you all of the best of React Native and all the best of Expo, if you need to opt out, you can. So let me install React Native Video. And I'll come back when that's done. Okay, next thing I need to do is in our app.json, under React Native Video, I need to set a few settings. And I literally just copy pasted these from the website for React Native Video, their documentation. You should just copy and paste them from me in the sample project that I have in the description. There's no reason to be memorizing this or something like that. You'll always be able to find this kind of stuff in the documentation. All right, so now that that's all in place, we're going to do npx expo prebuild, which will generate our iOS and Android folders, and I'll come back when that's all finished. Okay guys, so at this point, like I said, we need the app to actually be running on device. And I often get a question, how do you do that with Expo? So right now I have my Android device plugged into my computer. That's step one, make sure your device is plugged in. After that, you do npx expo run android -- device. The -- device tells Expo to look for devices that are plugged into your computer. And of course, this works with iOS as well, if you wanted to do that. But right now we're doing Android because that's kind of the harder version. As you can see, you see the plug right next to Pixel 7. And if I hit enter, the build will start and I'll come back when it's finished. Okay, so as you can see off to the side, I now have the app built with pre-build. And of course, the video library is now able to be accessed from JavaScript code. However, at this point, we have our final Android specific quirk, unfortunately. Luckily though, if we're careful, we can carry all this code over into iOS and we don't have to write extra stuff to get things working. Basically what you have to do on Android is you have to be very careful about when the video is playing. So the video can only be playing when it's on the screen because Android only supports having one video play at a time. If you have two videos playing or you try to play two videos at a time, the screen will just go black. Nothing will load. So we have to watch very carefully for when the video is being on play and when the video is being on paused. Okay, so the question is now, right, how do we know which video is being displayed on the screen at any given time? And we can do that by tapping into a prop called onViewableItemsChanged. And I'm going to quickly create a function for this. So whenever you scroll through, onViewable items changes. We got a crash there because I added a prop. Let's reload. Okay, so every time you scroll, onViewable items change is called. And I can kind of prove that here in the console actually. So let me pull this up. And as you can see, every time I scroll, I get this event. And what we can do is we can clip into that event to figure out which index is visible. So I'm going to create a set state for that. We're going to call this visible index and set visible index equals use state. And we're going to default this to 0 because the first index will always be visible. Next, to get the visible index, what we're going to do is we're going to use the keys of these different values in the list. So we're going to say event.viewableItems .at and -1. So -1 is the end of the array because sometimes you could have more than one viewable item. .key. And then we're going to set the visible index to new index. So now let's just log the new index just to prove that that's actually what's happening. So let me reload. And as you can see, whenever our new index becomes visible, that value is updated in our state, just like that, which is really great. That's exactly what we want. All right, so now that we know which index is actually visible, we need to add a few more props to the video wrapper. The first is going to be the all videos, which is just going to pass in all videos. And the next is going to be the visible index, which is going to be the visible index that we just came up with. So back in our video wrapper, let's add this. So all videos type is string array. And then the type of the visible index is a number. And so we can do this, and then we can do this. And now what we do is, instead of having text in here, we're going to replace this with video, which is going to come from React Native Video. And we are, of course, going to set the props. The source is going to be all videos at the current index. Oops. And this index, of course, being the index in the flat list, not the index in not the visible index. After that, I'm going to add a little bit of styling. And this style is just going to match pretty much exactly what we have above. So let's copy that in. But I don't need the platform specific stuff this time. Oh, and I again forgot to add my object brackets. Should clean that up. And then also I will have width. And as you can see, we're starting to get some stuff appearing, which is really nice. I want to make our resize mode equal to cover so that it covers the screen. Awesome, that's really nice. And finally, a couple more things I want to do. I want to set the pause state to be equal to, if the visible index is equal to the index that's actually the one that we're on here in terms of our components. And then last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a video ref, and I'm going to use that video ref to restart the video every time that it gets back into the foreground. So I'm going to say video ref equals use ref, and it's going to be of type video ref. And we're going to say use effect. So every time this comes into the visible index changes, what we're going to do is we're going to say video ref dot current dot seek to 0 to restart the video. And this should have a question mark, I believe. Yes. Okay, so let's reload things and let's see if this worked. And I see it didn't work. Oh, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is because I didn't put the video ref in, and that has the default to null. And the other reason is because I got my pause logic wrong. It should be paused if the visible index is not equal to the index. So the only one that's playing is the one that's visible. And let me reload, because that might do weird things if I don't. And as you can see, the videos are playing. And then if I scroll back, the video will restart, which is good. That's what we want. And as I scroll through, all the different videos are loaded, displayed, and also lazy loaded, which is really awesome. Okay guys, so coming to the end of this last section is almost a bonus section in a way, but what we're going to do is we're going to implement some different controls. We're going to do pausing a video, and we're going to do sharing a video. Of course, you could get wild with likes and comments and things like that, but you need a backend for that, and I wanted to keep this video focused on really just front-end specific stuff. So let's implement pause and share in this section. So in order to do that, I'm going to start by installing Expo asset. Just because it's a nice way to use your assets. It lets you kind of reference them directly instead of having to use imports and requires and paths and things like that. And so what I'm going to do is under assets and images, I'm going to create a new folder called custom assets. And inside here, I'm going to drag some images. So let me grab those. Whoops. And let me put them into assets. Cool. Now back in the app.json, I know we haven't seen that in a while. Under Expo asset, what you want to do is you want to include that file. So I recommend, again, you copy paste this from my project. Again, this is not something you have to memorize. All you need to know is that this path points to assets, images, and custom assets like we have here on the side. So now, in order to actually link the assets up, what you have to do is do your npx expo pre-build. And that should link everything up for you. And now we should be ready to go back to the video component. Okay, so what we want to do now that we're back in the component is we want to add some kind of pause functionality. And to do that, we're going to use this paused here that's in every single cell, because if you pause it in one place, it's going to be essentially paused everywhere. So let's call this status here, pause override, and set pause override, because this is going to make sure that it stays paused for everything. And we're going to say false. So it's going to start in a state of not being paused. Next thing we're going to do, and actually I'm going to pause this video until we're done. It's kind of jarring just seeing it repeat over and over. So what we're going to do next is we're going to create a pause function. And we'll call it pause, const pause equals. And then what it's going to do is it's going to set pause override to be not whatever the pause override value is currently. Pretty simple to understand. After that, we're going to pass it in as a prop to the video wrapper. And type it as a void. And then last thing we're going to do is we're also going to pass in the pause override value. So we will do that. And this will be a Boolean. Okay, so now in our paused function, we can say that if it's not equal to the index or pause override is active, that's when we want to pause everything. But the question is, how do we add sort of a button so that the whole screen acts as a button, right? And the way we do that's pretty simple. We just use a pressable and absolute position it and sort of overlay it over the screen. So what I'm going to do for our pressable is I'm going to say on press, we are going to do the pause function. And I'm going to create a style called overlay. And I know I use this $sign thing. Most of the time you use style sheet, but for the sake of like a small project like this, I just find it easier to create little variables instead. So for our overlay, what we're going to do is we're first going to absolute position it. So we're going to say style sheet dot absolute position object. This allows it to fill the entire screen. We're going to give it a background color of black because I want to actually darken up the video a little bit so our buttons really pop on top of it. Also, I have to type it as view style. And then the last thing we're going to do is give the overlay an opacity of 0.3 so that it's sort of see-through. And as you can see there, things got a little darker, right? Just to prove this is working, if I remove the opacity, you can see that that goes over top of it. Okay, so let's see if our button works. So I'm going to unpause it. And I'm going to quickly reload everything just so I'm sure our state makes sense. And when I click, the video does pause. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little pause indicator in the middle just to show that the video actually is paused. And what I'm realizing is I forgot to install one more library. So let's do that now. We're going to install Expo image. And after installing Expo image, we're going to have to pre-build one more time. Okay, so now after installing these libraries, we'll just have to compile Android one more time and we should be good to go. So after that brief detour, we should be able to now create that pause indicator. And what we're going to do is we're going to do it just under flat list because we have our overlay and we can just throw things in the middle. So we're going to have a little if statement. So we're going to say if there's a pause override, that's the only time we're going to show this. And we're going to make a pressable. Inside the pressable, we're going to have an image from Expo image. Our source is going to be pause. And I haven't set the style yet, so I'm going to leave that alone. And it probably won't show anywhere. Yeah, because we don't have any styles. Okay, so let's apply some styles. For the pressable, I'm going to call this pause indicator. And for the image, I'm going to call this play button image. Okay, let's go down and actually make these variables now. This is a view style. And I think this is actually a view style as well. All right, and let's fill those out. So for the play button image, I'm going to give it a height and a width of 50, just because it looks good. These values are a little arbitrary, guys. You can't be too specific when it comes to some of these things. They're really just inherently subjective. So I'm going to center it. I'll align its items to the center. I'm going to make the resize mode. Oh, it should be image style. That's why I'm not getting the type. Should be resize mode. Contain. That should take care of that. Now we have to do our pause indicator, like the actual view. For that, we're going to position it absolute. And then what we're going to do is we are going to align it to the center. Finally, we're going to give it a position from the top, which is going to be the height divided by 2, which is half, minus 25, which is half of the height of the button, which is 50 right there. Okay, so let's see if this worked now. I'm going to make this active again, and I'm going to reload the app. And if I click, we get pause with that indicator in the middle. Really cool. And if I click again, the indicator goes away. If I click again, we get it back and it's paused. So now that we have the pause button going, let's finish off by creating share. And we start by importing share from React Native. No external libraries needed here. And then what we're going to do is back in our home screen component, we're going to create the share method. But this one's going to actually take a parameter, and it's going to be the URL of our video. And then what we're going to do is when the share button is pressed, we're going to set pause override to be true because we want it to pause when we share. And I'm going to do a little timeout just so that there's some time for the video to actually pause before you share. And it's just going to be small, like 100 milliseconds. And then we're going to do share.share. And in here, I'll give it a title, which is going to be share this video. And then we're going to give it a message. And that message is going to be checkout. And then just the video URL. Oops. Now we got to pass that into the video wrapper. And the type, we're going to add share, which is going to be like that. And then we have to just create a button really quickly in order to get sharing to work. So before we create the button really quickly, I realized I made a mistake with this type. Should be a small s string. I don't know why I was thinking of Java there. But let's create the button. That actually is the share button. This is, of course, going to be a pressable. In the on press, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in item. Because item is a string. It's the URL that points to the actual video link itself. So you could click there and you could jump off to whatever other site. In here, I'm going to throw another image. The source is going to be our share from earlier. Finally, I'm going to have some text just at the bottom, and I may have to import that from React Native. Nope, it's already there. Oops. And instead of text, I'm going to say share. So I'm just going to quickly create some different style variables here that I'll use at the bottom. So I'm going to have share button container, share button image, and then I'm going to have share button text, which makes sense, right? They're all kind of similar names. So let me do this one first. And this is, of course, a view style. And inside of the share button container, I'm going to position it absolute because, of course, we have to kind of have it over top of everything. I'm going to give it a really high Z index and a really high elevation to make sure that it's up in the forefront of the screen, not anywhere near the background. I'm going to put it 70 from the bottom. I'm going to put it 10 from the right. And like I said, these values are a bit arbitrary, guys. They just kind of look nice. And I'm going to align item center. And finally, I'm going to give a gap of 8, just so there's a nice gap between the image and the text. So let me grab the share button image now. And that's going to be an image style. And inside here, I'm going to give it a height of 25 and a width of 25 because it's smaller. It doesn't need to be as big as the pause button was. The share buttons are usually pretty small. I'm going to center the image. I'll make its resize mode contain. And I'm going to make its tint color white so that it stands out in contrast to the darker background. Okay, so let's do our last one here, which is share button text. That is a text style. And inside of here, I'm going to make the color white. I'm going to make the font size 12. And I'm going to make the font weight bold. Okay, so let's see if that worked. And it does. You can see that the share button's kind of in the bottom right-hand corner here. Okay, so let's try and see if we can get this all working together. Let me unpause the video. And then let me reload everything. Okay, so now everything's working. As you can see, in the bottom right-hand side, we have our share button. And if we press it, the share tab comes up. We can then unpause the video and scroll through. And as we go through, if we hit share, as you can see, we get a different URL depending on whichever video we're on. All right, guys, that's everything. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know I really enjoyed making this. And as always, happy hacking.